process as opposed to adding it on to the election ballot. So the cost really would just be in terms of the yes and no campaigns, and so cost to sort of the greater public versus to the park board. The time to implement a decision coming out of the plebiscite would really bump this decision out into 2019. The election will be in late fall of 2018, and so really the feedback from that plebiscite would then come back to the park board in 2019 with very similar options really that are before the park board today. The complexity is not really that complex other than once the park board makes a determination on the plebiscite, it does then go to city council, and it is up to them at that point to then make the determination of if it would go forward or not. And there's some decisions that they have around that plebiscite as well. In terms of public engagement, it obviously is high as it relates to Vancouver voters, but again, as I mentioned, it does exclude the lower mainland component of users or others interested in the aquarium as well. So fundamentally, this is an option. It just is a slower path to resolution, knowing that the decision would be passed out to 2019. Option 2 of accepting the aquarium's plan, the highlight really of the plan is the voluntarily agreeing not to breed belugas and phasing out the display by 2029. It does focus more on the belugas and doesn't address the other cetaceans on display. But there are some other actions that the park board could look at in addition to accepting the aquarium's plan in terms of implementing the already recommended oversight committee. That was the direction that was given back in 2014. That's really been on hold, so that could be dusted off. There could be an update to the bylaws to restrict breeding and phasing out the belugas by 2029. So what that would look like is really taking what the aquarium has already said they're going to do and just encoding it in the bylaws to make sure that it is enforced. And staff from both organizations could work collaboratively on implementing any of the other remaining recommendations from 2014, like the Oversight Committee, and there was also a review of operations that was suggested at that time as well. So in terms of our criteria on this particular option, obviously it has a very low financial impact, depending on the amount of work that potentially could be done on bylaws to support it. It just wouldn't be a costly exercise. That work could be done immediately. The aquarium has already announced their intentions, and so park board staff could work alongside them. The complexity is medium, depending on if the board does direct staff or did direct staff to work alongside the aquarium and what that would look like, or if there was any accompanying bylaw changes. And the public engagement is low because obviously there would be limited ability to continue to discuss the issue with the public. So bottom line on this one is really that the plan addresses the belugas, but it doesn't address the wider issue of cetaceans, which has been raised by some members of the public. I'm having a delay on my clicker. On option 3, amending the parks control bylaws. This is really quite a broad topic, and there's many things that can fall in here, and there's certainly more detail in the board report. But this could really range anywhere from the approval and enactment of the 2014 bylaw changes that were already contemplated, which banned breeding, to drafting a whole new set of bylaws, depending on the direction of the board. So really the impact, the timing, and the cost depends significantly depending on what the level of changes that would be proposed to the bylaw, the amount of legal support that would be required, and the complexity of what those changes would be that were being asked for. We could, however, do that in quite a quick manner. So we do anticipate a 2017 completion of that work if this was deemed to be a priority of the board. And it does enable a high degree of public participation, as any bylaw changes would be heard in this forum and people would be able to speak to them. So again, this one's a bit tricky from our criteria because it's too broad at this point to really give you a firm assessment on the financial, the time, the complexity of these particular issues. It will depend on the level of degree of bylaw changes that the board would potentially want to contemplate. Option 4, maintaining the status quo, I guess is always an option. The issue with this particular option is it doesn't address some of the public sentiment that has been expressed recently. So that would be unaddressed. Now, the board, as part of this, could ask us to go back to the 2014 work, which is considered still active business before the board, and ask the staff to either implement, amend, or rescind any of the previous recommendations from the previous board. The one thing about this is it does allow the aquarium to change its plans over time and kind of determine its destiny. The one thing I would note is there still may be a bylaw review required, even under status quo, if Bill S-203 becomes law. And what Bill S-203 is it's a Senate bill that is currently being contemplated federally. It is to limit dolphins and whales in captivity. It has passed second reading and it actually just started at committee hearings last week. So it's unknown what the timeline would be and the destiny of that bill, but if it was to come into law at some point, that would have an impact as well. Again, obviously, in terms of our criteria, there's very little impact of maintaining the status quo. So in conclusion, there were 3 alternatives to the plebiscite that we identified and further investigated. There may be more out there, but those were the 3 that we landed on. Not all of those options are really mutually exclusive. So, the bylaw changes could support any of those options, quite frankly. There is some time sensitivity to dealing with this issue, given the aquarium has announced its intentions and some of the lead time required on some of these initiatives. And the staff does have an obligation to inform the aquarium of any actions that may impact their operation. So depending on the direction out of this evening, we would communicate that with the aquarium. So the recommendation contained in your report that the Vancouver Park Board directs staff to further direct back on implementation of the board's preferred option to address concerns regarding cetaceans at the Vancouver Aquarium, as outlined in this report. Option 1, call on City Council to include an assent question, a plebiscite, in the 2018 municipal election. Option 2, accept the Vancouver Aquarium's February 20th, 2017 announced plans. Option 3, amend the parks control bylaws. And option 4, maintain status quo. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions from staff, from commissioners? Commissioner McKinnon, you're up.
Thank you. I just want to clarify one of the things you said at the beginning when you had the timeline up of this issue in the last little while. The plebiscite on phasing out cetaceans in captivity motion from April 2014, I don't believe it came from Park Board. I believe it was a councillor who brought that forward.
I think that's fine. I think you're correct.
Oh.
I think that it was introduced by a councillor and not approved.
That's right. Thank you.
Thanks.
So while we're here and we have you up, I understand that there is an outstanding lawsuit. Can you describe what that is? Because I believe it has to do with oversight, which is part of the presentation. So can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I'm not a lawyer, but we do have external counsel who has worked on this. It is more of a judicial review as opposed to a lawsuit, in that the aquarium, after the last direction by the board to take a look at changing operations, raised the question and asked the courts to take a look at whether the park board has the jurisdictional power to do that, or is it overreaching in what the intention of the bylaws were. I would say, in summary, the aquarium felt and probably still feels that that's an overreach in terms of the intention of park control bylaws. We took the opposite position. We submitted our documents, and then there was an understanding that if we weren't moving forward, there would be no more proceeding with that action, but that action is still alive.
Thank you.
Commissioner Kirby-Young.
Thank you. I had a similar point of clarification for the record as Commissioner McKinnon, and just maybe to expand on that point, it's my understanding in speaking with the councillor that brought the original plebiscite motion that it was referred, just for the record, by council to Park Board because it had not first been discussed at the Park Board, and out of respect for the jurisdiction of the park board on this matter. So that's my understanding.
You're correct.
Staff can correct me, but I want to ensure that that's clear for the record. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any further questions? Commissioner Shum.
Thank you. Can you please comment on the legal implications of each options?
We actually had this at a category. Our external lawyer suggested we not discuss that in public because we would be giving legal opinion and legal advice. We're not lawyers. And so suffice it to say that the more significant the impact on the aquarium, the more significant the risk of triggering some sort of legal response.
And are you able to give a rough number if there is any legal implications? Because essentially this would be to the taxpayers.
Certainly, anytime you go to court, it's an expensive route. We try to avoid going to court where possible. I certainly would suggest that you could ask the representatives, Dr. Nightingale from the aquarium, their viewpoint on that, because it would be their action.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I have a follow-up question on that. Do you think the legal significance would increase after the expansion? So if we waited till the plebiscite and then tried to make a change to the bylaw, do you think the legal significance would increase after the expansion's been completed?
Again, I'm not pleading the fifth, but our lawyer did suggest that we don't get into too many details. But I think in general, not specific to this case, the more that somebody can demonstrate damage as a result of change, probably the more significant the claim could be in terms of what mitigation or some sort of recourse would be sought by an individual. So the further we are into a project, the greater the risk, I think, of that becomes.
Okay, and second question. We talked about the bylaws being a quick action and that they could be completed by 2017. Is that including a bylaw that would ban cetaceans from the aquarium?
The content of the bylaw would be at the will of the board. So if the board approved a set of objectives, you wouldn't write bylaws, but you would give us direction to work with legal to craft bylaws that would achieve the outcomes that you're seeking. And that would be up to you to do everything from banning immediately to putting timeframes on them to whatever you felt was reasonable and in the best interest of public policy. We'd start working on those right away.
Third, I guess with the lawsuit with the jurisdiction, the expansion, that is not within, it has been approved, is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. Commissioner Evans.
Thank you. I understand that there's another group in the city that is looking at opening a competing aquarium. And I'm wondering if you have any information about where those plans are.
I've heard only rumors. I've had no direct communication from anybody. I've just heard some rumors that there was an interest in a private provider of an aquarium. I think Dr. Nightingale, again, you could perhaps ask him that question. I think he's plugged into the aquarium community.
Okay.
But I've just heard a rumor that there was a commercial interest, a private interest who were exploring the idea of an aquarium in Vancouver.
Thank you.
Okay.
Commissioner Crawford.
Thank you. Option number 3, if I could ask a quick question about that, if we go back to there. There it was. Oh, okay, I guess it was 4. Let's go to 4. Next one. Where did it go? There was a point where it said staff has an obligation to inform the aquarium. Yeah. I was curious why it was listed as staff has an obligation. Is it a part of the contract? Is it really the park board that has an obligation?
Yeah, I think it should say that the park board has an obligation. It would be through your staff, but our organization
Has an obligation.
owes it as proper, acting in good faith to inform the aquarium of any changes that would affect them.
Thank you. And the other question, if I might, I'm not familiar with the process of a bylaw change. Is that any different than a typical motion we have here? And is it like first reading, second reading, something like that?
Yeah, there's 3 readings required. We've done that with the smoking bylaw, the non-smoking bylaw, where we would put together a draft bylaw based on the direction that you give us. It would come back to a board meeting. It would have 3 readings. It can have 3 readings at one meeting. You can go through that process and then it's approved and then we send it back to legal to enact the bylaw.
Thank you.
Any further questions from commissioners? Seeing none, thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.